My name is Alain-Philippe Durand. I'm the Dorrance Dean of the College of Humanities, and it's my honor and pleasure to welcome all of you here in person and from all over the world on live streaming to this session of the Tucson Humanities Festival. We would like to start today by saying that we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. We also want to emphasize that this land acknowledgement is a milestone in our ongoing dialogue with the Tohono O'odham, the Pasqua Yaqui, and the 20 other federally recognized tribes in the state. It is an indicator of our commitment to collaboration and to maintaining government-to-government relationships with the native nations and indigenous communities with whom we share this region. Thanks for joining us again at the 12th annual Tucson Humanities Festival, which started back then as a Humanities Week, and through community outreach, engagement, and incredible speakers, has grown into a months-long series of thought-provoking presentations during October each year to celebrate National Arts and Humanities Months. This year, the theme for the festival is storytelling. I would like to thank our sponsors who helped make tonight's event and the festival possible: Bookman's Entertainment Exchange, Dorrance Foundation, Humanities Seminars Program, and the Arizona Council for Humanities. We are excited to offer tonight's presentation to a wide audience at home through live stream and captioning provided by the town of Oro Valley. For those watching live, if you have questions you would like to ask the panelists, please find the link on Humanities Festival homepage. For those of you attending in person tonight, please use the QR codes posted throughout the seating area to submit questions, as in deference to COVID safety, we will not be passing the microphone during the Q&A. So you should see those signs that are across the room with the QR code where you can ask your questions that will be asked after the main presentations. Tonight, we have the pleasure of listening to 4 College of Humanities professors presenting In Search of Fright, Tales of Monsters, Ghosts, and the Undead. The faculty presenting in this panel tonight are frightfully suited for the topic. Joela Jacobs, who is Assistant Professor of German Studies. Dr. Jacobs' research focuses on the intersection of 19th and 21st century German literature and film with plant studies, animal studies, environmental humanities, Jewish studies, the history of sexuality, and the history of science. Dr. Jacobs teaches a course on weak tales and strange encounters, German Romanticism and beyond, as well as another course entitled From Animation to Zombies, the Ethics, Biopolitics, and Aesthetics of Defining Life. Next to Dr. Jacobs, we have Dr. Colleen Lucey, who is Assistant Professor of Russian and Slavic Studies. Dr. Lucey is a specialist in 19th century Russian literature and visual culture, and she's the author of the book Love for Sale, Representing Prostitution in Imperial Russia. Dr. Lucey teaches the course RSSS 315, Vampires and Werewolves, Slavic Folklore in Our Culture. We also have Dr. Lucey Swanson, my colleagues in the Department of French and Italian. She's Assistant Professor of French Studies. Dr. Swanson's research examines how historical narratives and political discourse are reflected in recent Francophone literary and visual culture, particularly that of Haiti and the French Antilles. She teaches a course on contemporary Francophone fiction and cinema that explores how recent writers and filmmakers represent buried histories, including that of the zombie, as we will hear about tonight. And we also have Dr. Eddy White, who is Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Public and Applied Humanities. Dr. White specializes in classroom assessment. He currently develops and teaches courses for the Department of Public and Applied Humanities. Among other courses, he teaches a course entitled Weird Stuff, How to Think About the Paranormal, the Supernatural, and Other Mysterious Things, which is open to all University of Arizona students. And he's also currently teaching a humanities seminars course called The Paranormal, the Supernatural, and the Human Experience, open to all community members for our program in humanities seminars. Finally, we also have with us our colleague Suzanne Thompson, who is assistant professor of practice in the Department of Russian and Slavic Studies. And we need to thank her for the music tonight because she was playing the beautiful music earlier before the start. Suzanne worked for many years in the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia as an embassy attaché, disarmament contractor, and journalist. She earned an undergraduate degree in piano performance at the University of Cincinnati's College Conservatory of Music and is providing the live music for us tonight, as I just said. So I would like again to thank all of you for coming. And without further ado, let's go on with our first speaker. Please welcome Eddy White to start tonight's talk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Eddy White, and I teach a course about the paranormal and the supernatural. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as part of my section about tonight's talk about ghosts. And it's one of the paranormal phenomena we get into with the course I teach. You're probably familiar with the famous quote from Muriel Rukeyser, the American poet, that the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. And I think actually both of them are probably true. But I'm going to start. I'm going to bookend my talk with I'll start with a story, and I'm going to end with a prayer, and we'll see how it goes. My story is about my ghost story is about two famous historical figures and a famous house, of course. Soon after World War II, Winston Churchill was visiting the White House when he is said to have had an uncanny experience. Having had a long bath with a scotch and cigar, he reportedly walked into the adjoining bedroom, only to be met by the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. Unflappable, even while completely naked, Churchill apparently announced, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." The spirit smiled and vanished. Okay. It's a story some of you may have heard of, and you may have heard about the idea about the White House being haunted also. The course I teach, it's called Weird Stuff, Paranormal, how to think about the paranormal, the supernatural, and the mysterious. It's been a lot of fun to teach, and students have been enjoying it also. One of the first things I do, every time I teach the course, I always do a paranormal profile survey. And so I get the students to check what their levels of belief is in different paranormal phenomena. And you can see their choices here. I believe very much, somewhat, a little, I don't believe. I just finished one course, and I'm currently teaching another one. And let me just show you some of the results just about ghosts. And so the question is, ghosts and haunted houses are real. And if you see in the bottom corner here, the count is the number to pay attention to. 47 students completed my survey. And you can see belief in ghosts and haunted houses among my undergrad students is quite strong. Many of them believing very much or somewhat. This is 47 students. This is another class of 55 students. Very similar. More than half of the students in the class believing very much in ghosts, which is I find very interesting. And it's kind of representative of just paranormal belief in the United States. And this is from the Chapman University survey. And you see the first bar here, places can be haunted by spirits, 58%. So belief in ghosts is widespread. There are two types of ghosts. We're learning about it in the course I'm teaching. While ghost experiences are many and varied, they can be divided into two basic categories: hauntings and apparitions. So hauntings are characterized by ghosts that appear repeatedly at the same time and place and go through the same motions time and time again. Apparitions, on the other hand, are ghosts that appear to interact with the people around them. And some appear only once in an attempt to impart some information or complete some business. And other times, others may appear many times. Anybody know this famous ghost from films and movies and stories? Who is it? Got a name? Jacob Marley, of course. Yes, from The Christmas Carol. And one of the articles we use in our course is called "The Fringe is Mainstream." But the author says, the belief in haunted places is so ancient that its origins are lost in time. And he also notes that it's likely that ghost stories predate written language by thousands of years. Ghost hunting has become very popular in lots of different places, including the United States. One of the articles that we use in the course I teach is this one. It's called "Give Us a Sign of Your Presence, Paranormal Investigation as Spiritual Practice." And the author, he spent 3 or 4 years basically joining ghost hunting groups around the country and interviewing people, and just interviewing people who were into ghost hunting and finding out why they did that and what interested them so much. So let me just tell you a little bit of information about what he discovered. He says, a lot of people are out there are pursuing a fascinating but frustratingly elusive prey, ghosts. Currently, over 3,000 paranormal investigation teams exist in the United States, and more exist worldwide. This is from 2015. There's probably more now. I know there are 3 or 4 at least here in Tucson. So ghost hunting organizations and groups have been spreading quite a lot in recent years. Paranormal investigators use a wide variety of investigative methods in their attempts to find evidence of ghosts and therefore life after death. For some investigators, the practice helps validate existing religious beliefs, while for others it prompts a spiritual transformation. And the author notes that contemporary paranormal investigators differ in their techniques, but are motivated by a shared desire to capture evidence of life after death. Heidi, a 34-year-old investigator who was raised very strict Lutheran, explained, and let me just give you one voice. Here's what Heidi says. Honestly, the reason why I even thought about getting into this was for answers. You know, what does happen to you after you die? And why do some people seem to go to heaven and some people stay here? It would be nice to be able to prove something that you believe in without any doubt. You want to find that definitive thing that's going to go, look, here's the evidence, here it is. So just a voice of a voice of one ghost hunter. Paranormal investigation is a spiritual practice in that the act of investigating creates within participants a sense of being connected to and aware of some transcendent, perhaps divine reality beyond our world. So it's some of the rationale why people get involved in ghost hunting. So I think for many people who are involved in paranormal investigations and ghost hunting, they're in search of spiritual experiences rather than being frightened or being afraid. Apparently there's some ghost hunting, it's not ghost hunting, but there are ghosts that are here at the University of Arizona. Here's a headline from maybe a couple of years ago. The ghost of Old Main. Construction workers working to renovate Old Main have come to know the story of Carlos, the Old Main ghost. So if you have some free time later, you can wander over and see if Carlos is around. Maybe you can see him. Here's a picture of a ghost, the haunting of Maricopa Hall. Okay. I don't know if that's the actual picture of the ghost, but some of the residences, some of the buildings on campus seem to be haunted. I had the experience of taking a bunch of my students, about 30 students. We went on a ghost hunting trip downtown in November of 2019, and I got some funding for the university, so the students were quite happy to go for free. The picture isn't very good, but here's me with a bunch of students. So we went and we visited a place downtown. We had some ghost hosts that were explaining to us what we could expect to see. Apparently there were 5 ghosts in the building. And so some of my students were where they provided us with some equipment, some electronic equipment for looking for ghosts, but they also provided us with some dowsing rods, which are used for finding water or other things sometimes. But here's a student with some dowsing rods and another couple of pictures here. But nobody got any evidence or a picture of a ghost except me. Just before we left, I got a picture of a ghost. I'm going to show it to you. And here's my ghost picture, okay? That may look like a cat. That is a ghost cat. Completely transparent. A couple of perspectives on ghosts. From this book called Science and Spirituality, consider, if you adopt a scientific naturalistic worldview, it means you require evidence before you accept any claims involving the natural world. There is no evidence whatsoever for the persistence of the mind after physical death. So according to the author, Berger, for ghosts to exist, much of what science has learned about life, physiology, and physics would have to be spectacularly wrong. So he concludes that there are no ghosts, period. A different perspective from James von Prague, who wrote about the ghosts among us. And James said, science is all well and good, but when you get firsthand information from a ghost, it doesn't get much better than that. So I think James is right. I mean, if you can get that, it doesn't get much better than that. My opinion about ghosts, and the students asked me about it, and I guess I've come to a flexible approach about my belief in ghosts. And my belief in ghosts kind of depends on the time of the day. During the daytime, I don't believe in ghosts, but at night, I'm a little bit more open-minded about that. Okay, I started with a story. I'm almost finished, and I'm going to finish with a prayer. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord, deliver us. Thank you. And next is my colleague, Colleen Lucey.
Thank you, Professor Thompson. Thank you, Eddy. I feel spooky already. Okay. So I'm Colleen Lucey from Russian and Slavic Studies, and it's my great pleasure to speak a little bit tonight about vampires and the history of vampires and the relation to the Slavic world. So the vampire has captivated human imagination for centuries. And while vampirism and stories of vampires and other life-sucking revenants have existed around the world for thousands of years, Western beliefs and our beliefs about vampires are deeply connected to Slavic folklore. The word vampire, as we know it, is in fact adopted from South Slavic, upir, pit, meaning to drink, and actually entered the English language through connection with the Slavic lands. Now, this is all something that we talk about in the class Vampires and Werewolves, Slavic Folklore in Our Culture. So our modern conception of the vampire is it's very close to Twilight, but very far removed in some respects from Slavic folklore. Our modern conception of the vampire dates probably to the 1700s, when a vampiric epidemic swiftly moved through the South Slavic lands in present-day Serbia and attracted a lot of attention from Western Europeans. So officials from the Habsburg Empire traveled to the Balkans and encountered vampire hunters, groups of locals who believed that the recently deceased rose nightly from their graves to feed on blood of relatives and friends. As they opened the graves, they found what they believed to be evidence of life. So hair had grown longer, nails had grown longer, the body seemed as if it was bloated, as if the vampire had recently fed. A stake to the heart, decapitating the head from the body, sprinkling the grave with holy water, and similar measures were believed to vanquish the vampire and send the deceased to eternal life. Tales of vampire hunting expeditions were fueled by the rich Slavic tradition of folklore. These stories of the undead inspired Bram Stoker as he composed his iconic novel Dracula. Like a diligent scholar-writer that Stoker was, he went straight to the library, and he started to look for stories of the undead, which is when he came across the name of the medieval ruler, Vlad III, also known as Vlad Dracula. The surname Dracula, with its etymological link to Dracul, meaning the devil, so intrigued Stoker that he titled his novel after the medieval ruler. Now, the real-life Vlad Dracula was a Christian crusader, a medieval leader of Wallachia, located in present-day Transylvania. Now, as this woodblock print makes clear, he struck fears into the hearts of enemies and his citizens alike by capturing them while alive and impaling them, a most gruesome and cruel death. Now, while there are no historical records that Vlad Dracula drank blood per se, this kind of bloodthirsty behavior made him connected to the vampire in the popular imagination. It seems as if he's dining, feasting in the company of rotting flesh, and maybe dipping his bread in the blood of recently executed victims. We have, I think, it seems a need to tell stories of the undead. And Dracula and the vampire myth have inspired countless films, paintings, TV shows, comics, even cartoons for kids. So vampirism remains deeply rooted with Slavic culture and has, I think, to interesting effect, been resurrected and used for political and social commentary, both in relation to Russia and in response to Russian rulers. So satirical images poke fun, pun intended here, at Putin, current president of Russia, by likening him to Vlad Dracula. Now, while images produced in the West underscore the historical affinity between Vlad Dracula and Vlad Putin, Russians have also been able to capitalize and cash in on the affinity to their own purposes. So when Putin's former wife, Lyudmila Putina, claimed that her husband was a vampire, "Мой муж vampir," the tabloid stars printed an expose delving further into this issue. It was the highest-selling issue of the magazine to date. I'm going to quickly change to the next slide because this is being televised. So, as we can see from our own experience, definitions of vampirism show the wide range of possibilities that this monster offers to modern audiences, both Slavic and not. Of course, the vampires of popular culture of Twilight, with their sparkly skin and their vegetarian impulses, are far removed from those of Slavic folklore, as you'll shortly see. These flesh-eating, blood-drinking creatures rise from their graves to haunt and feed on the living. They remind us of the powerful symbolic meaning of blood to be a source of life and also a source of death. The blood is the life, to quote Deuteronomy, and also to quote Dracula. The vampire drinks the blood of the living and is refreshed, is born anew. Tales of such creatures circulated in Slavic oral traditions for centuries and were first compiled in the 19th century by the ethnographer Alexander Afanasyev. So his stories, including the one that I'm going to share with you now, really feature these various kinds of sorcerers, heretics, animated corpses, and other undead beings. In this tale, titled Buckets of Blood, we can recognize many of the traits of the modern vampire. I share with you. Buckets of blood. A peasant was riding through a field past a cemetery. It had already become dark. A stranger dressed in a red shirt and a sporty sheepskin coat overtakes him. "Stop," he says. "Take me up behind you." "Fine. Hop on." They enter the village and approach one house after the other. Although the gates are wide open, the stranger keeps saying, "They're locked." You see, these gates were branded with the cross. He approaches the last house. The gate is locked with a padlock, weighing a full 18 pounds. There's no cross, and the gates open by themselves. They enter the cottage. 2 men are sitting on a bench, an old man and a young boy. The stranger takes a bucket, puts it behind the boy, stabs him in the back, and immediately scarlet blood begins to trickle out of him. After completely filling the bucket with blood, he drinks it. He does the same to the old man, and he says to the peasant, "Dawn's upon us, let's go to my place." In a flash, they find themselves at the cemetery. The vampire is about to seize the peasant, but he is saved by the cock's crow, and the corpse disappears. The next day, they find both the young boy and the old man dead. They immediately seek out the grave and dig it up, and they find the vampire has recently fed. They take an aspen stake and impale him. The end. Buckets of blood. Thanks so much. We next have Lucey Swanson.
Thank you so much for this chance to share a scary zombie story with you this evening. Buckets of Blood is a hard act to follow, but I will try. So tonight I'll be sharing a zombie story from Haiti by a Haitian poet, Clément Magloire Saint-Aude, who helped create the griot movement, which promoted Haitian folklore. He was also inspired by French surrealism, as you'll get a sense of in the dreamlike quality of the story. And the story I'll be reading tonight is called Veillée, or Vigil, and was published in 1956 originally. And I'll be reading a translation by Michael Richardson. Before I actually read this, I'd like to say a few words about the origins of the zombie in Haitian culture. The zombie, before it became a cannibal, the cannibal that we all know and love, it was born centuries ago in the folklore of the French Caribbean. And it likely has roots even further back in African spirit beliefs. Today in Haiti, the zombie is a revived corpse that is forced to work in places like sugarcane fields. So it's really an embodied memory of enslavement, and it's a way of critiquing this legacy of this history as well. So now I'll read Clément Magloire Saint-Aude's story, Vigil. The dead girl was lying in a narrow bed. She was black and beautiful and seemed to be asleep, delivered, one might say, from the cares of living. It was night in an uncertain alley in Bel Air. In the mortuary chamber, the gathering seemed crushed under the strain of oppressive and mysterious sorrow. The neighbors had gathered on the porch, and the dead girl's mother was chatting in a low voice with the corpse attendant. It was whispered that the deceased had not succumbed to sickness, and it was confidentially said that she had expelled her last breath without suffering. They said it was not a natural death. Drinks were being served in the corridor. I left Teresa's room, the dead girl's name was Teresa, and went on the insistence of the mother to sit between her and the corpse attendant, who immediately asked me for a light for her cigar. I struck a match, and as I brought the flame closer to the attendant's face, noticed that she had the eyes of an owl or a witch, with sharp animal teeth and hands that were horribly calloused. Our eyes met sharp as lightning before I turned to the maid who served cinnamon tea. At midnight, an angry man ran from the adjoining alleyway. He was mixed with a belly like a pregnant woman's. This thug was lashing out with vehemence at a young girl in a transparent nightgown. She was very beautiful and light-skinned, with a mottled complexion and the looks of an angel. She was insensible both to the flailings that lacerated her body, and to the blood that stained her clothes around her shoulder. In the distance, a dog howled sinisterly at death. My friends Laurent and Gaston called me over to share a bottle of rum with them. I left the dead girl's mother and the corpse attendant to their gossip, offered my apologies, and joined the drinkers. I sat down in an armchair in the corridor adjoining the dead girl's room, and so I was face to face with the deceased. In her white dress, heightened around the bust with lace flounces, Teresa seemed to be awaiting First Communion. In her eternal stillness, there was nothing mournful. There was on her lips the outline of a smile with an imperceptible hint of mischievousness. Her hair, raven black, covered her forehead. But as I examined her face, I had only to stretch out my arm to be able to touch her body. Something caused me to shiver. The eyes were not completely closed, and from beneath the eyelids, the dead girl seemed to be looking at me, and to look at me, in fact, with such fixity that filled me with a sense of panic. I tried to move, but an intolerable cramp paralyzed my movements. I wanted to speak, but was voiceless. And Teresa still looked at me alone. And my own eyes felt magnetized and were unable to detach themselves from those eyes from the other world. I was sweating ice cold, and the dead girl looked at me, and still her eyes, now half open, were like those of the living. And I saw her pupils, which were hallucinatory. Candles had been placed by the deceased's bedside. Suddenly, the flame of one of them flickered, revived as though in response to the breath of a hidden presence, and then was extinguished. The other glimmers of light, as though waiting for such a signal, followed suit. In the half-light that followed, Teresa opened her eyes wide. They were strangely beautiful eyes and had a sensual gaiety that was unseemly to the point of cruelty. With a great deal of effort, I managed to rise like an automaton in order to close the eyes of the dead girl. There was a terror that chilled my blood, and a wisp of smoke escaped from my jacket. An indescribable serenity suddenly permeated my soul as I lifted my pipe to my lips. All the guests had left. For half an hour, the cathedral bells had rung. In the east, the stars paled. So here we have a tale of what seems like a girl who's in the process of being transformed into a zombie or a slave. But now I'd like to say a few words about how this kind of zombie transformed into the zombie that we all know and love, the cannibal. And this starts with the text, The Magic Island, a travelogue by William Seabrook that first introduced the zombie figure to US audiences during the US occupation of Haiti. It represents zombies as automatons that work in the sugarcane fields of the Haitian American Sugar Company. It was hugely popular, and it inspired the first feature-length zombie film, White Zombie, which is also interesting because it mixed this image of the zombie as someone enslaved to a sorcerer with ideas about hypnotism that were hugely popular at the time in Europe and the United States. And so that's probably where we start to see the outstretched arms, the vacant glaze, and the total lack of volition in the zombie. And after White Zombie, there were numerous other zombie films before the zombie became a cannibal. And it's most often in Night of the Living Dead, which was directed by George Romero, that the zombie is said to have become a cannibal. And that's despite the fact that the word zombie is never uttered in the film. So the people who are called ghouls and homicidal maniacs, but who do have bloodthirsty lust for human flesh, as it says here, probably were recognized by audiences as zombies because of these same characteristics, the outstretched arms, the vacant stare. And so that's how the zombie migrated from Haiti, where it's a figure of enslavement, to the film industry of the United States, and now globally, of course, as a flesh-eating figure of viral terror and of divided nations at war with themselves. Thank you.
didn't sound very scary, did it? Right? So why did I choose that? Now imagine a doll, a creepy doll or a marionette dancing to that tune. And all of a sudden it gets really, really creepy. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this piece that's coming out of an opera and what that has to do with the story I'll be telling you about today, the story of the Sandman. Who here knows the Sandman? Everybody knows ghosts, vampires. I see one hand very clearly up, another, okay, can't see you that well, another hand. Okay, so a few people know the Sandman, but most of you seem to not know the Sandman, so very different from the vampires, zombies, ghosts. So I'll have to tell you the Sandman story first, right? Okay, so as a young boy, Nathaniel was told about the Sandman as a goodnight story. The Sandman steals the eyes of children who do not go to sleep, and he feeds them to his own kids on the moon. Nathaniel is pretty traumatized by that bedtime story, and he associates the Sandman with a visitor who comes at night and conducts experiments with Nathaniel's father. They are alchemists. They're trying to make gold. One night, Nathaniel doesn't stay in bed. He gets up to see what they are doing, and the visitor, who's named Coppola, threatens to throw glowing embers in his eyes and screw off his arms and legs. And at a later point, Nathaniel's father actually dies during one of these experiments, and so young Nathaniel associates all this with the Sandman. Coppola is the Sandman to him. And especially if you think about, the sand in the eyes, the embers in the eyes. So young Nathaniel has this childhood trauma, and in the now of the story, he's grown up. He is studying at a university town, maybe a little bit like Tucson, maybe a little bit different. This is a sort of 19th century Germany, and he meets a seller of glasses and binoculars, eyes again. That salesman is named Coppelius, very similar to Coppola. He is a doppelganger of his childhood fear. And Nathaniel is convinced he's meeting the Sandman again. But his friend, called Lothair, and his fiancée, called Clara, they try to calm him down with rational explanations, the two brother and sister, by the way. And, so far so good. But then a fire destroys Nathaniel's house, and he moves into a new place right opposite from his university professor. Now you might say, okay, not as much drinking, don't be as loud, but there are different problems afoot here. His professor has a daughter named Olympia, and Nathaniel becomes obsessed with Olympia. He looks at her through a set of binoculars, and that's a machine to trick the eyes, and he bought them from Coppelius, and he falls in love. So when the professor puts on a ball to introduce his daughter to society, he sees his chance, despite his engagement to Clara, just to remind you. And he goes to this ball, he dances with Olympia all night, and he talks to her. And weirdly enough, the other students do not seem interested in her. But Nathaniel is enchanted, and one of the reasons is because she's such a good listener. She always just says, ooh, ah, when he tells her stories. She never talks back. So this, has him, convinced that this is the one for him, and he tries to propose to Olympia. But when he goes to the professor's house, he sees the professor and Coppelius, the binocular salesman, fighting over her body. She is, in fact, a machine. She is an automaton, and Coppelius had made her eyes. Nathaniel goes mad. That is just upending his worldview, and Clara, good Clara, cares for him. So at that point, the narrator adds in the story that people get really paranoid and wanted to make sure that their partners were actually real-life people and not machines. So they started pinching their partners to make sure they get an actual response. And as the story goes on, Nathaniel recovers. They visit his university town again, and they look down on it from a tower. And any one of you who's read German stories might already have an inkling what happens now, because they kind of all end in the same way. So Nathaniel uses binoculars. he accidentally trains them on Clara, and he thinks she is a machine too. She is an automaton as well, and because he thinks that, he tries to throw her off the tower. She is saved by her brother Lothair, but Coppelius appears in the crowd, and he calls out, "Pretty, pretty eyes," and Nathaniel throws himself off the tower. That is how most German stories end. Everybody dies. But we actually have a quote-unquote happy ending in this story because we hear that Clara gets to be married and have 2 children and live in a country house. You can decide if that's a happy ending or not for her here. But that's the story of the Sandman. Now, the Sandman has, so this version of it that I was telling you was written by E.T.A. Hoffmann, great name. The full name is Ernst Theodor Amadeus, and he's a German author of Romanticism. Now, Clara, just to point that out, she is klar in German, clear. She's often translated as Claire, too. So she's a symbol of enlightenment. And this author was a really talented guy. He also was a lawyer, also a composer, also a music critic, a draftsman, a caricaturist. So I want to see, like, his business card would have really probably been funny in this day and age. And he was the first to really write about these dark elements of Romanticism in the German context and is particularly famous for his fantastical pieces, the Fantasiestücke. And except for the zombie, I think all of the figures we talked about tonight appear in his stories. Speaking animals, secret societies to add to the ghosts and the vampires, doppelganger figures, of course. And so one thing that sticks out about this particular story is the idea of, and let's see, automatonophobia. There we go. Okay, it's the idea of see, second time it doesn't work anymore. The fear of humanoid machines, especially if they seem sentient. And so that is where we started with the opera, with that doll, with that Olympia figure. That's why that's creepy. But it might be ventriloquism for you. It might be automata. It might be AI that freak you out if they're just too close to looking and acting human. So you might say, why in the 19th century? This is a problem for today. But at that time, the Industrial Revolution brought a lot of technological innovations. And when I say technological innovations, I do also mean things like glasses that change your view of the world, right? So in addition to that Olympia figure, we have technology in the alchemy, the optical instruments, the doppelgangers. And so the question is, can we trust our eyes when technology interferes? So this is the Sandman as you would meet it today in Germany. Quite the different picture. Still a children's goodnight story. So Little Sandman, Sandmännchen, is the most popular German children's story on German TV. It's run both in East and West Germany since 1959. And the East German Sandmännchen is what you see here, because that one won out, which is not very common in East-West relations. So this Sandmännchen comes on every night, I think a little before 6 on German TV still, and it sprinkles sand into your eyes, but for good dreams. And there's always a story being told in the middle. So that is what Sandman is today. But Sandman is also in a lot of other popular ideas, and I do want to flag this moment of the dream, the good dreams, because Freud was really into the Sandman story by Hoffmann and was using it in his text on the uncanny and also his concept of the doppelganger. So, where is the Sandman in the US? Well, you might know this song, the Chordettes. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream, right? So that one, here too, the Sandman brings you a dream and brings you a dream guy, though. And then there's another one, a little bit more recent, different musical genre, Metallica, Enter Sandman, exit light, enter night. Take my hand, we're off to Never Never Land. So the Sandman is still around, and maybe when you heard Sandman, you thought of this graphic novel. Maybe some of you know it. If not, I can only recommend it, the Sandman series. Or perhaps you thought of the literal Sandman in Spider-Man 3, also a Sandman. So the Sandman, I think, through the sand can really take on any kind of shape, it seems like. And the last one I want to share with you is Oh yeah, there it is this Oscar-nominated animation called The Sandman from 1992, a 10-minute clip on YouTube. I can only strongly recommend it. It is spooky, scary. Just search for Sandman, the 1992, and you'll get this one. So to this day, Sandman scares us, and I hope you like this introduction to another frightening monster.